We're in the dressing room with Roberto Duran. What happened in Roberto's words?
Sí, que me entró un calambre en el estómago y me puse bien débil de brazo y de pierna, y por eso fue que dejé de pelear.
He got cramps in his stomach and his body, and the upper body, and then his arms, and he got weaker, so that's why he stopped fighting. He quit the bout.
Does this mean the end of boxing for Roberto?
Sí, ya no peleo más allá.
Yes, I'm not fighting anymore.
You've been taught that the hardest thing is failing. But failure has a story, a reason, something to point to, something that explains, at least in part, what happened. Failure is legible. It even offers a kind of comfort, even in loss. The fighter who is stopped in the 12th, not because he quit, but because the cut above his eye left the referee no choice. The founder who sends the shutdown email to everyone who believed in him. The man who loved someone for years and ends up helping them pack. Everyone understands that. The story has a shape. The loss can be named. Failure has an alibi. A surrender is different. A surrender gives you nothing. Just the knowledge that you could have continued and didn't, and the rest of your life. To build a story around why. It doesn't arrive as a decision. It arrives at 11 p.m. You have energy. The thing is open on your laptop. Nothing is stopping you. And you close it anyway. Tomorrow, you tell yourself. You close the laptop. That's not failure. Nothing stopped you. You just quietly didn't continue. That's what a quiet surrender looks like. Not dramatic, not final. Just a laptop closing on a Tuesday night. A man who fights and loses is understood. He gave what he had. It wasn't enough. The story ends with dignity intact, even in loss. But a man who stops before the story resolves carries something different. Not shame necessarily. Something more private than shame. A question about himself that only he knows the shape of. The hardest thing isn't failing. It's stopping when you still could have continued. And spending the rest of your life building a story around why. There is a man whose version of this happened in front of millions. The difference between his story and yours isn't what he did. It's that his was public. Roberto Duran's hands were not soft. They were called manos de piedra, hands of stone. And the name wasn't poetry. It was a description. By 1980, those hands had ended careers, broken the composure of men who had never been broken before, built a record across 15 years that placed him among the most complete fighters who had ever lived. In June of that year, he walked into a fight against Sugar Ray Leonard, a man faster, more fluid, more technically gifted, the golden boy, the favorite. Duran was the street fighter from Panama who wasn't supposed to win clean. He did. He returned to Panama a national hero. And then, he stopped living like a man still on the way somewhere. The hunger that built him wasn't ambition. It was distance. Distance from the streets. Distance from having nothing. Distance from the version of himself the world had already written off. But the moment he won, the distance collapsed. And he didn't know who he was without it. That's the part nobody talks about. What happens to a person when the thing that made them dangerous no longer has a reason to exist? The parties, the food, the weight. It's easy to read that as weakness. It wasn't. It was what happens when a person who has been running from something their entire life finally stops running and doesn't know what to do with the stillness. By the time the rematch call came, he was close to 200 pounds. The welterweight limit is 147. The fight was 5 months away. He didn't use them. His manager, Carlos Ileda, later explained why he took the rematch so quickly. It wasn't confidence. It was fear. He said he pushed for the rematch fast because Duran had started drinking. And he was afraid that if they waited, Duran might lose to a second-rate fighter. Leonard heard about it. His people had seen Duran in New York, partying every night, approaching 200 pounds. So Leonard pushed for November. as soon as possible. He said later it was calculated. He just didn't know Duran's own manager was thinking the same thing. The people closest to him could already see what he hadn't said out loud yet. Hunger that comes from survival doesn't need a reason to show up. Hunger that comes from ambition does. And for the first time in his life, he had to choose it. That's a different fight entirely. He arrived at camp badly overweight. What should have been a preparation camp became a weight cut camp. He wasn't building toward the fight. He was trying to undo what he had become since the last one. November 25th, 1980, New Orleans Superdome. From the opening round, something was different. In Montreal, Duran had dragged Leonard into his world. Pressure, menace, control. He had made the faster, cleaner man fight an ugly fight and won it. Leonard had learned from that. In New Orleans, he refused Duran's world entirely. He boxed. He moved. He made Duran miss. And then he mocked him. Dancing, clowning, turning what should have been a war into something closer to a performance. Ray Arcel, Duran's trainer, one of the most respected cornermen in the history of the sport, later said he believed part of what happened that night was humiliation. Not pain, disorientation. The man who had always imposed the mood was suddenly trapped inside someone else's. The feared man had become the man being played with. In the 8th round, with the fight still live, with the outcome still genuinely open, Roberto Duran turned to the referee. He said 2 words. No mas. No more. There was no knockdown, no visible injury, no catastrophic moment that preceded it. He was upright. His hands were in front of him. He had been in worse places, harder rounds, harder men, harder circumstances, and had not left. And he stopped. The arena didn't know what to do with it. Neither did the cameras. Neither did the millions watching. Ray Arcel, the man who had seen more fights than almost anyone alive, said this was the last man he would have expected to quit. For 50 years, people have tried to explain it. Stomach cramps, frustration, a breakdown of what no one saw coming. There is even dispute over what he actually said. Leonard later claimed he never heard the words. Duran himself insisted for years that he said something different entirely, that the famous sentence wasn't even what he said. History likes a clean sentence. A private collapse rarely gives you one. What remained was the silence, the walk, and 50 years of explanations that never fully arrived. The arena went quiet. Not the quiet of awe, the quiet of something that didn't know how to end, because a surrender like that doesn't leave wreckage. It leaves an absence, and absences are harder to carry than damage, because there's nothing to point to, nothing to explain, nothing to heal, just the shape of something that was there and then wasn't. There was nothing to show for it. No cut, no knockdown, no moment anyone could point to. That's what makes it different from losing. A scar means something happened. People respect scars. Scars have stories. Scars say, I was in a fight and I came out the other side. A quiet surrender doesn't give you a scar. It gives you an absence where something used to be, and you spend years trying to explain that absence to yourself, without naming what it actually is. Just an empty chair at a desk you stopped sitting at, a file you haven't opened in months, a version of yourself you remember being. Not younger, just less settled, less willing to accept that this was how things were going to be. The absence is quiet enough to be absorbed into the rhythm of normal life. Until it can't be. Until something. A conversation. A moment of stillness. A person who still believes in what you stopped building surfaces it. You already know what it was. You've known for a while. The question isn't the knowing. It's what you've been doing with it. There's a version of this that doesn't happen in a boxing ring. It happens in the middle of something you were building, a project that stopped getting worked on, not because it was finished, not because something external intervened, because one day the effort required to continue exceeded whatever you were willing to spend. And you didn't announce it. You just gradually stopped showing up. The sessions got shorter, the gaps between attempts longer, the sense of urgency quieter, until one day there was no attempt at all. And life continued around it, and over it, and eventually the thing you were building became a thing you used to work on. Sometimes the thing you stopped building wasn't a project, it was a person. There's a version of this that looks like effort, where you're not ignoring the thing, you're actively working on it, reading about it, talking about it, telling the person in front of you that you're making progress. And in some ways you are. That's what makes it so hard to name. Because the progress is real enough to believe in, real enough to point to, real enough to keep the story going for another month, another year, another version of the conversation that ends the same way. But in the moments that actually matter, the ones where the old pattern surfaces, where the choice is right there in front of you, you make the same decision. Not because you're not trying, because the trying has become the story you tell instead of the change you make. And working on it is the most socially acceptable version of no mas. It sounds like the opposite of surrender. It has the language of effort, of someone still in the fight. But if the behavior doesn't change, if in the moments that count, you still do the same thing, then I'm working on it is a story you're building around a decision that was already made. And the person in front of you has already started grieving the version of you they thought was coming. They just haven't said it yet. Neither have you. And Duran had the same problem. He just couldn't hide from it as quietly as you can. Here's the thing about a story you've told so many times, it starts to feel like the truth. It works. In every room except one. The one you're alone in at the end of the day when the story runs out and the question is still there. Duran had his version of this. Stomach cramps, Leonard's clowning, a body that had been pushed too far, too fast. Each one true enough to hold for a while. None of them closed it. The world got the story. He kept the answer. Do you know the difference between the story you told yourself and what actually happened? Not the version you'd say out loud. The version you come back to at 2 a.m. when nothing is asking you to be reasonable about it. Duran held world titles across 4 different decades. The man who said no mas in 1980 was still fighting professionally in 2001. 21 years of returning to the ring after the night he left it. And for decades, in interviews and documentaries, in the quiet that follows a long career when the noise finally settles, he was asked about it. New Orleans, 8th round, 1980. He had explanations. He changed them every time. And in all those years, across all those fights, all those rounds, all those chances to become a different version of the story, he never said it again. The question that followed him out of New Orleans is the same one you've been carrying. Without fully looking at it, not why did it fail? Why did you stop? And whether what you called exhaustion, or timing, or not having the right tools yet was the truth, or just the story that was easier to live with.